They found her shivering and barefoot, her nightgown ripped, behind the smokehouse. Her small hands were caked with blood and soil. She didn't cry or speak, but she was pregnant at 9 years old. And the man responsible, if he could even be called that, wasn't a stranger. He shared her last name, her jawline, her blood. What followed wasn't an investigation, but a burial, not of a crime, but of a history so grotesquely tainted that the county coroner himself said, "Let the hills keep their secrets." Yet, the hills don't keep secrets forever. We traced the lineage back through rotted church records, family Bibles with missing pages, and whispers from former midwives now deep in dementia. Every trail led to the same name, **Warren Elbridge Holloway. **One man, one house, one bloodline that never branched, only curled in on itself like a diseased vine. Born in 1892 in a shack without a floor, he was reportedly delivered by his own half-sister, who was also his grandmother. The only time Warren's life was documented was on a marriage license to a 12-year-old cousin. The rest of his story exists in oral tales, faded photographs, and a growing list of girls in the family who never reached 16. There was something wrong with all of them, eyes set too far apart, fused fingers, blank stares, twitches, and limps. The town referred to them as the river folk, as if they were a separate species from man. They lived just outside Possum Ridge, Tennessee, up a logging trail no one used, where the trees grew too close and the birds fell silent by noon. Warren never held a job, paid taxes, or left that hollow. But children were born, generation after generation, all of them his, and all of them doomed. This isn't just a story about inbreeding. It's about what happens when a family decides the world is too dangerous to trust, so they turn inward, over and over again, until they forget what normal is, until a child barely old enough to tie her shoes shows signs of pregnancy. No one is surprised because in that family, it had happened before, and it would happen again. The first time someone tried to report the Holloways was in 1937. A traveling school teacher named Miss Little came through the ridge, hired to educate the local children in a one-room shack near the creek. She only lasted 5 weeks. On her last day, she arrived in town with a bruised cheek, torn shoes, and a trembling voice. She told the sheriff she had witnessed things no woman should ever see, children with rope-shaped bruises, babies nursing from girls who should still be playing with dolls, and a man whose stare made her feel like prey. She never spoke Warren's name, she didn't need to. The sheriff made the climb up to the Holloway homestead just once. He took 2 deputies and a preacher for good measure. What they found was silence. A line of barefoot children stood in the yard, blinking like animals startled by light. Warren didn't greet them or speak. He only stood on the porch with a shotgun across his lap and a young girl, no more than 10, clutching his leg like a dog. The preacher begged him to let the children come down. Warren smiled. "They ain't yours," he said. "They ain't nobody's but mine. Legally, nothing could be done." The girls fearfully and mechanically denied everything, as if they'd rehearsed it. The sheriff left, and within a month, Miss Little disappeared. Her suitcase was found floating in the river, but her body never was. The townsfolk got the message. No one went back up there again. The Holloways weren't part of the county, they were a shadow on its edge, a curse no one dared to lift. But every year, another girl would vanish from the school registry. Another midwife would be called in the dead of night. And always, the child born would bear the same features, a sunken nose, pale waxen skin, and eyes that didn't blink long enough. They were quiet children who didn't cry or play. It was as if joy had never been taught to them, as if it had been bred out of them entirely. And still, no one intervened, because by then, the Holloways were no longer seen as human. They were something else, a bloodline twisted beyond recognition, a family that had folded in on itself until the only things left were possession, survival, instinct, and reproduction. And Warren was its priest, its architect, its god. In 1949, a fire broke out in the hills just west of the Holloway land. Dry lightning, they said. The blaze came down fast, and by dawn, half the ridge was scorched. For the first time in decades, Warren and his children were seen in town. 8 of them, barefoot and covered in ash, stood in front of the county store like ghosts. The townsfolk stared, but no one approached. One boy's mouth hung open, crooked and toothless. A girl, perhaps 7, had a swollen belly that didn't match her frame. The sheriff tried to ask questions, but Warren just stared. "We'll go back when it cools," he said, and led them back into the smoke. But one didn't return. Her name was Elsie. They said she was about 9, though her bones suggested younger. She'd been left behind, perhaps on purpose. A farm couple found her near the tree line, silent and covered in soot. She was taken in, fed, and cleaned, but something was wrong. She wouldn't speak, not once, and she wouldn't look anyone in the eye. When they gave her a doll, she buried it. When they offered her a bath, she flinched as if she was being struck. And when she began to show signs of pregnancy, the doctor wept. She wouldn't name the father, couldn't, or wouldn't. But the townsfolk knew anyway. A blood test later confirmed what no one wanted to say aloud: she was carrying the child of her own blood. The story broke in the local paper for one day, then it disappeared. The sheriff called it an error. The paper recalled all copies, and the doctor who made the report left town. No charges were filed, no arrests. Warren was still alive, still breeding, and no one dared knock on his door. Elsie didn't survive the birth. The child did, pale as snow, with twisted joints and wide, unblinking eyes. The county placed the baby in state care, though rumors say it was moved to a private home paid for by anonymous donors. One nurse claimed the child could hum at 2 weeks old. Another swore she heard the name Warren whispered during the night shift. No one believed her, or maybe they just didn't want to. The house where Elsie died was abandoned. It still stands today, with warped boards and nailed-shut windows, as if the building itself refuses to remember. But the land remembers. It always does. By the early 1960s, Porsum Ridge was a ghost town in everything but name. The mines had closed, the train no longer stopped, and the children born on the outskirts never made it past their first birthdays, except for the Holloways. They multiplied. Locals spoke in lowered voices about what they called the Inbred family, a joke, they said, but it wasn't. It was a warning. The few who ventured near their land, surveyors, census workers, Jehovah's Witnesses, told stories afterward of strange sights: girls carrying infants who looked older than they were, boys with twisted hands leading livestock with human-like obedience, and a figure always watching from a second-story window in the main house, always the same stillness, always the same shape. Warren was said to have grown ancient by then, white-haired, toothless, with skin drawn so tight it cracked when he moved. But he still ruled them, giving commands only once and punishing infractions without delay. No outsiders ever witnessed it, but the after-effects were visible: children with scars they wouldn't explain, women who limped but never spoke of falls. Then came the journalist. He arrived under a false name, claiming he was writing a book on Appalachian isolation. He spent 3 days near the ridge, camping, photographing, and taking notes. No one ever found those notes. Only his camera, smashed and buried at the base of a tree. His body was discovered months later, partially decomposed, with a shattered jaw and a missing tongue. The sheriff at the time ruled it animal predation, but there were no claw marks or tooth patterns, just one word carved into the tree near the corpse: **hours. And so, Porsum Ridge was forgotten entirely, not lost, just erased. Roads leading to it were left to rot, and maps were redrawn. It vanished from gas station directories, as if the county wanted no trace of what lived there, as if some higher office had made a decision: let the Holloways die quietly. But they didn't. The pregnancies continued. The births. Some say a few of the Holloway women were sent to state hospitals, renamed, and reassigned. But their children carried something with them, something not entirely human. Teachers in foster homes reported children who stared too long, never cried, and drew the same symbol again and again, an open eye inside a jagged circle. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? It was in 1978 that a woman named Clara showed up at a Knoxville trauma clinic, pregnant and alone. She claimed to be 23, but records suggested she was younger, maybe 17. She was malnourished, had nervous system damage, and her gaze was vacant. Her speech was stunted. When asked who the father was, she gave a name no one recognized, Poor Warren, not dad or father, but Poor, like something from a family story passed down in whispers and bruises. Doctors noted severe deformities in the fetus, spinal malformation, abnormal skull curvature. But Clara refused intervention, saying the child would be just like the others. When asked what she meant, she only smiled quietly, the way you might smile at a painting you've seen 1,000 times before. And when she finally gave birth, alone in the clinic bathroom, she bit through the umbilical cord herself and whispered into the newborn's ear before anyone could intervene. No one knows what she said, but nurses reported something strange. Every time they entered the room afterward, the infant stopped crying. Not calmed, but stopped, as if it had never cried to begin with, as if it had been told, "We don't do that here." Authorities traced Clara's lineage back through incomplete records and missing death certificates. But one thing kept repeating: the Holloway name, faded on birth ledgers, misspelled on licenses, and scratched out entirely on some school documents. But it was there, over and over. The family that didn't branch, only looped. Clara disappeared before the child reached 6 weeks. One day she was holding it, the next, her bed was empty, and the window was broken outward. There was blood on the sill, but no sign of struggle, no footprints, no noise. Nothing. Just a baby, still sleeping, still breathing. And one message scrawled in dried feces beneath the crib, ***, he's coming home. ***. The clinic burned down within the year. The cause was undetermined. Several staff members left town entirely. One nurse ended up institutionalized after reporting recurring dreams of a faceless man whispering genealogies into her ear. He would name children and dates, then lean in and say, "Now you." She would wake up screaming. By the early 80s, the Holloway name had officially vanished from Tennessee records. But names mean nothing when blood remembers, and their blood remembered everything. In 1993, an amateur genealogist named Richard Clemens started digging into his ancestry for a local Civil War heritage project. His father had been adopted, and there were gaps in the records that always bothered him: missing birth certificates, relatives who appeared and disappeared like ghosts. But what disturbed him most was the silence. Every time he asked his aunts about the family's origins near Porsum Ridge, they either changed the subject or cried. Richard traced his line back to a girl named Leah Holloway, born in 1911. No father listed, mother unknown. Census documents placed her in a boarding house for feeble-minded women, as it was called back then, but she vanished from records at age 15. No death certificate, no marriage, just a blank space. The deeper Richard looked, the worse it got. Multiple birth records under different spellings, Holloway, Holloway, even Holloway, and each led back to the same region, the same isolated creek, the same rumors: children born with webbed hands, boys who didn't speak until they were 10, girls who gave birth before they turned 12. And one name was always there in the shadows, like a watermark burned into the lineage: Warren. Richard's obsession grew. He started visiting county courthouses, reading property deeds, and poring over moss-covered graveyard headstones. One day, he found a small, unmarked cemetery in the woods just east of the old homestead. There were 37 stones with no names, only numbers. Infant-sized graves, all hand-dug. He stayed there for hours, filming, talking to himself, whispering names he'd pieced together from archives and whispers. The next day, he posted a message on an obscure genealogy forum, ***, I think I'm one of them. ***, he never posted again. 3 days later, Richard was found dead in his home. Heart attack, the coroner said, but the body was covered in scratches, his own fingernails embedded in his chest. Carved into the floor beneath his chair was one word: ***return. ***. Authorities dismissed it, saying he'd had a psychotic break, but the forum remained, and others found it. One woman in Kentucky said she recognized the symbol Richard had posted, a jagged circle with an eye at its center. She said her grandmother used to draw the same thing in the margins of her Bible. Another man from West Virginia claimed he shared the Holloway bloodline and that his 8-year-old daughter had just started humming a tune she'd never been taught. When he asked her where she learned it, she said, "He sang it to me." The man in the woods. There's a reason families don't speak of certain ancestors. A reason names disappear from family trees and photographs are turned face down in attic trunks. It isn't just shame. It's fear. Fear that what was buried might still be alive somewhere, walking in shadows, humming lullabies meant for no one. In 2005, a private investigator named Janet Waller took on a missing persons case near the Kentucky-Tennessee border. A 14-year-old girl named Maggie had vanished from a foster home without a trace. There were no signs of forced entry, no witnesses, just an open window and a pile of dirt by the sill, as if someone had crawled in from the ground. Janet followed the trail through old case files and forgotten corners of local bureaucracy. What she found was chilling: 3 other missing girls, each from different towns and different homes, but all with the same detail in common. Every one of them was descended from the Holloway line. She didn't want to believe it. Genetics don't stalk. Bloodlines don't abduct. But what she began to piece together couldn't be ignored: a map of disappearances clustered in a crescent along the old Appalachian routes. All young rural girls, all traceable to the same poisoned route. And then there were the sightings, always the same: a tall, thin man with sunken eyes and a crooked mouth, sometimes in barns, sometimes in fields, always watching, and always gone before anyone could speak. Janet pushed deeper. She requested sealed court records, psychiatric files, and adoption histories. In one folder, buried among decades-old foster logs, she found a note written by a caseworker in 1971. The handwriting was shaking and erratic. It read, "Some bloodlines don't end. They wait. They scatter, then pull back when the time is right. The Holloway children aren't gone. They're circling." Janet turned everything over to the state, but no action was taken. 2 weeks later, she vanished. Her car was found at the base of a logging trail outside Porsum Ridge. The engine was still running, doors wide open. In the passenger seat, her recorder was static for 9 minutes, then a single whisper, ***, he never stopped. ***. That recorder is still in evidence storage, logged under a number but never processed. And every few years, a new case arises: a child goes missing, a blood test comes back off, records don't match, and DNA markers cluster too closely. And always, there's something in the eyes. Because Warren Holloway is dead, but his design, his sickness, was never buried. It was inherited. Today, the Holloway name is gone from census records and erased from birth certificates. You won't find it in any school enrollment, driver's license, or obituary. But that doesn't mean the family is gone. It means they've adapted, scattered into rural foster homes, married under different names, and been given new identities by overwhelmed caseworkers and sealed court orders. But the traits remain, not just in the bone structure or the speech patterns, but in something deeper, in the behavior: children who rock silently for hours, infants who resist being held but stare unblinking for minutes at a time, girls who speak in riddles about the man in the cellar or the cold room with no corners. You'll find them if you look closely, in Mississippi, in Arkansas, on the back roads of Missouri, places where state officials rarely visit and neighbors know better than to ask questions. There's one town, never named on a map, nestled in the forest past the Cumberland line, where a retired nurse claims she delivered 2 babies in the same week, both from girls under 12, both pale and silent, and both watched over by men who claimed to be uncles but offered no ID. She said she still dreams about those births. Said the room filled with a smell she couldn't describe: wet leaves, old meat, and something like iron. And when the babies cried, it wasn't a sound, it was more like a warning. Then there's the coroner in West Virginia who keeps a private notebook, not for the dead, but for those almost dead. Cases where the DNA doesn't align, where a newborn's genetic markers match too closely with its mother, where even computers flag the entries: non-viable match, possible replication error. But it's not an error. It's a loop. A closed circuit of blood rerunning a program that should have ended generations ago. Some say Warren Holloway had over 30 children. Others say it was closer to 100. No one will ever know for sure, because numbers don't matter when the blood keeps folding inward like a black hole of lineage, consuming memory, identity, and even sanity. There's a rumor that in certain Appalachian valleys, mothers still hum a lullaby passed down from nowhere. No lyrics, just a slow, dragging melody that curls through barns and fields like smoke. And if you follow it, they say, you'll find a child alone, watching, not afraid, waiting. And if you ask their name, they won't answer. They'll only say, ***, he told me not to. ***. The Holloways are no longer a family. They're a pattern. And it's not finished.